and actually taking action and being prepared to stand firm.
That's Andrew Marr's voice, of course, you heard, as well as Emily Thornberry. Turkey says Khashoggi was killed and dismembered by a 15-man hit squad that had flown into the country on the day he was last seen. Riyadh has rebuffed that claim, but has failed to provide any evidence he's still alive. Britain, France and Germany, fairly rare event, united in their support for Donald Trump's calls for an explanation. The joint statement, the first coordinated response to the disappearances, said there needs to be a credible investigation to establish the truth and, if relevant, to identify those bearing responsibility. Middle East analyst Kyle Orton joins me now. Which way should the West go next? Good morning to you.
Good morning. It seems that, the investigation is the first thing that's going to happen, just because until they know what's actually happened to Khashoggi, there's no real way to... You can't start punishing the Saudis before you've actually got evidence that they've done some wrong. And since the Turks have said they have video footage of what happened at the consulate and then don't seem to have turned it over, we're in a bit of limbo as to what actually happened.
For those listening who are trying to work out why, presumably, Mr. Khashoggi was so despised by Saudi, what are his supposed crimes?
He was a critic of the government. This is why it's very different to... Some people who don't like Turkey particularly are pointing out that Turkey often kidnaps, renditions, abducts people abroad for crimes against the state, but they do tend to be terrorists. It's people like the PKK that the Turks go after in the Balkans and elsewhere. Khashoggi had done none of that. He's not... Even the Saudi government doesn't accuse him of organising terrorism inside the kingdom. He was just a vocal critic of the direction that the current Crown Prince is taking the country in.
He went there initially, my understanding is, to prepare some documents so he could marry a Turkish citizen. Is that correct?
That's right. He wanted divorce papers for his wife, who is still in Saudi Arabia, so he could marry his new wife.
And then he was asked to return a few days later, and that's the last time he was seen. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. We hear about Saudi now talking tough. Presumably, we looked at oil prices or the supply of oil. Is that what they're talking about?
I think so. They did back down on this yesterday. There's the threats from Saudi apparently came from a columnist in one of their newspapers, but it was taken as this guy is very close to the Crown Prince, so it's a sort of semi-official statement. But the Saudi embassy in Washington yesterday did clarify that wasn't so, that he spoke only for himself and the kingdom is cooperating at every level with the investigation.
How nervous would Saudi Arabia be, do you imagine?
It's difficult to say because the fundamentals of the relationship are not going to change because of this, because it was never a values-based relationship. It's a one of common interests, and it's fairly transactional. Saudi Arabia needs security from us. We need free flow of oil from them, and stable prices, and secure sea lanes, and military cooperation and stability on the Gulf. So those things all remain true no matter what's happened at the consulate in Istanbul. And they're going to remain true for a long time to come.
And if you're reading, hearing, seeing this in Riyadh, and you see President Trump say, I tell you what I don't want to do, Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, all these companies, I don't want to hurt jobs, I don't want to lose an order like that, it's a pretty hollow sabre rattling, isn't it?
It means that I think the worst of your fears are probably off the table. But the list of things that can happen to Saudi Arabia are, I wouldn't say extensive, but there are things that can happen. The immediate one that's going to happen is their image, and the media coverage of them, and even episodes in Congress, so their weapon sales in Congress will come up against much more criticism. And also in, obviously, the British Parliament, that's already happening with the leader of the opposition taking a firm stand against them. So they're going to have a lot more trouble in that sense. There are also things on intelligence sharing and technology, and perhaps even some sanctions through things like the Magnitsky Act in the US.
Yes, I was going to talk about the possibility of Magnitsky sanctions. Do you think they could work here?
It's possible. It depends, I think. All of these things depend on political will. I think that everyone is basically wanting a decent interval at the moment because it's, as I say, the the fundamental underlying relationship just won't change. But Saudi Arabia will basically have to spend some time in the doghouse, and everyone kind of wants that to be over as quickly as possible because the regional challenges all require Saudi cooperation. The immediate ones, mostly to do with Iran.
And lastly, we touched a little bit on this. Would Saudi care about its public image, its global image?
I think they do, mostly because it's a matter of strategic security for them. They need the Western security guarantee, and if their image is tarnished too badly and they become too unpopular in the West, it makes it much more difficult for Western governments to deal with them.
Yeah, but with this and the Yemen conflict going on, they're not doing a lot to court popularity, are they?
They aren't. The Yemen war is one of those things that was already causing them some heartburn, especially even in the US Congress, and that actually maybe were the axe falls, so to speak, in this, because there were proposals to delay weapon sales, to cancel certain weapon sales, including missiles, guided missiles. That may end up being the kind of the sanction that falls on them over all this, but it was heading in that direction anyway.
Very grateful to you for all your background. Thanks for your time this morning, Kyle. Orton is a Middle East analyst. So when you have a